Okay, we'd like to ask everybody to find your seats, and we're going to start the second segment of our program, which is on AI and protecting vulnerable populations and inclusion of minority groups in design and deployment of AI. This panel is going to touch on core commitments to equal protection and non-discrimination, challenges associated with gender, race, diversity in data and coding, and then the special responsibilities and rights of children. Special responsibilities to protect the rights and needs of children. This is just showing how thinly I am now spread. We have two wonderful leads of this segment. Brandie Nonnecke is the founding director of the CITRIS Policy Lab at UC Berkeley, and Stephen Vosloo, digital policy specialist at UNICEF. But Brandie is going to do an opening to frame the conversation for us.
Thank you, Eileen. So good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, great. We're awake. I thought you just had coffee. Well, welcome to today's session, Protection of Vulnerable Populations and Inclusion of Minority Groups. My name is Brandie Nonnecke, and I'm the founding director of the CITRIS Policy Lab at UC Berkeley, where we engage in interdisciplinary technology policy research and engagement in the interest of society. AI systems are increasingly taking on a central role in core institutions, influencing consequential decisions that directly affect human rights. Automated decision systems have made their way into our healthcare facilities, courthouses, and employment offices, deciding who gets insurance, who receives parole, and who gets hired. While in many instances the application of AI is intended to increase efficiency and efficacy by overcoming errors and biases inherent in human decision-making, risks of algorithmic bias, when an algorithm takes on the prejudices of its creator or the data it is fed, threatens to deepen disparities. We will have 4 presenters today who will each provide insight into the development of ethical AI, responsible AI, humane AI, and inclusive AI. Each will present for approximately 15 minutes, with 5 minutes of Q&A to follow. We are using Pigeonhole to collect audience questions, and I will review these questions and ask them to the presenter during their 5-minute Q&A portion. We are also using Twitter to capture feedback and questions. Tweets will be sent out automatically from my account at @bnonnecke, with a question formulated by each speaker to engage you in conversation. I encourage each of you to go online to see those questions, and I will review the questions with you now. AI is pervasive in children's lives, yet there is a lack of safeguards to ensure applications do not infringe on their rights. Steve Vosloo, Policy Specialist, Digital Connectivity and Policy Lab at UNICEF, will highlight priority policy strategies and ask, what do you think policy should address on AI and child rights? Creating responsible AI that respects human rights is like raising a child. Cathy Baxter, architect of ethical AI practice at Salesforce, will share best practices for creating and managing responsible AI systems and asks, what is the best parenting advice that is also relevant to raising a responsible AI system? AI is informing decisions that affect the rights of refugees, from automated eligibility screening to resource allocation. Rebeca Moreno Jimenez, Innovation Officer and Data Scientist at UNHCR Innovation Services, asks, how can we best prioritize the needs of vulnerable people affected by automated decision systems? And last, the diversity crisis in AI development has led to innumerable negative impacts. Ecem, who is an inclusivity advocate, AI for All alumna, and founder of Technoladies, will discuss strategies for enabling greater inclusion. What strategies do you think should be pursued to ensure the future of AI is inclusive? So again, each of these questions will be on Twitter under my handle @bnonnecke. And so now we'll turn to our first speaker, Stephen Vosloo.
Good morning. Can you hear? That's good. Yeah. Cool. What have I done? Sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brandie. I want to speak briefly this morning about the issue of AI and child rights coming from UNICEF. And I'll share with you some highlights from a report that's come out recently that looks at how children use AI and look at how we begin to think about that usage from a rights perspective, and then some of the work that UNICEF wants to do with its partners in terms of setting these policy guardrails for AI and children. Okay, so why child rights? I'm not going to spend much time on this, just to remind you that the world had the Declaration for Human Rights, and after that realized that there was a need for child rights. So this year is the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, so it's a big year. It's the most ratified UN document ever published. And children have specific rights because they are vulnerable and because childhood is such an important time for growth. And they're deserving of services that need to be provided to them. At the same time, we don't want to take only a vulnerable lens. We want to see AI as also children, as also empowered agents in an AI world. And I think of AI and climate change in the same, and children in the same bucket. Climate change, there will only be more of it. It's more important for our children than it is for us and for future generations. And AI is the same. As the world becomes more AI-enabled, that world for children becomes more important. Okay, so child rights is important. Right. So UNICEF, along with some partners, including Berkeley, sorry, we've lost the screen, but so excuse me for turning. With World Economic Forum, with Berkeley, with Baker McKenzie, a few other partners formed something called Generation AI, which is looking at how, in an AI context, child rights and children can be protected and empowered in an AI world. So this is the kind of broad umbrella program that we're working under. This is the report that I mentioned. It's officially launched will be launched on the 10th of June, but it's available right now. And there's the link. It's something that was done by the Human Rights Center at UC Berkeley. And these are the students mostly. And some of them come from, they're master's students. Some of them come from the law faculty, and some come from computer science faculty. So it was a really nice mix of students working on something, looking at AI and child rights, but from themselves young people, but from these different lenses. And so it's a great report. I really encourage you to read it. And I'll give you some of the highlights here. So, like I said earlier, it looks at AI and children from a rights perspective. And it's highlighted some of the rights that AI will impact upon. And it's important to think about rights because they sit above all technology usage. So we have the right to privacy, to leisure and to play, the right to education, the right to equal treatment. There are many other rights, and there are many other rights that are touched by AI, but in this report, these are some of the main ones that we highlighted. So let's look at 4 quick case studies of how children use AI, including ourselves, some of the examples, and some of those rights. So AI in education, I know that there's a whole track dedicated to this. At the moment, my background is actually educational technology. I'm very excited about AI in education. I don't think anyone's doing it really well at the moment, but for the last 10 years, we've been talking about the promise of it, and the promise is amazing in terms of kind of learner-facing systems and adaptive and personalized learning. And when we can get that right, you have the potential for quality education at scale. There's teacher-facing for AI, which would be kind of automated assessments and freeing up the teacher to teach, or the lecturer, and also creating dashboards for how students are understanding issues. And then on a more system level, my background was school education, so I'm thinking in that, but of course it applies more broadly. But AI can help do analysis of data collected across a whole school district looking at student performance and predicting and informing where additional resources are needed. So there's huge potential, and as we see, the global market for this will just get bigger. At the same time, I don't think that enough is being done right now within education systems to prepare us for the AI in education future that's coming. And these are some of the issues that potentially hold true. So we look at bias and discrimination. And that's one of the rights of the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the right to non-discrimination. We don't know what the AI is going to do in terms of streaming students. Based on current data, it may stream pupils to technology jobs and girls to other types of jobs. Because the data is biased, that work is biased. Or those kind of algorithms, and streamings can be biased. Understanding and adaptability. Increasingly in developed countries anyways, we're seeing robots in education and virtual assistants, which again holds huge promise, but when you get a virtual assistant and a child, a human can read emotions, a human can read certain kind of situations that a child may not be understanding something, may say something that requires a more kind of sympathetic response. And so there may be an understanding and adaptability lack when it comes to AI. There's, of course, the kind of digital divide and economic divide. Data misuse and privacy, I think we understand that. But I think for us, in terms of AI in education, as AI becomes used more and more, how do we know that the data being collected at a childhood level and at a youth level won't affect you later in life? And that's one of the big questions. And an example would be, if you're not a particularly good student, you find it hard to sit in class, you could be fidgety, the system could pick up on that, and later as you're having a job interview, saying, well, your future employer could say, well, this person's not a particularly good student, so why should we hire them? Okay, so next example, surveillance systems. So facial recognition is a big issue. We know in the US at the moment it's getting a lot of press. What's interesting is that through kind of improvements in deep learning and machine learning, previously facial recognition would be used to kind of recognize people and to link them to an identity. Now you can identify sexual orientation, or try to, emotions, even individual characteristics. So as the system begins to do that, what are those use cases being used for? Who's collecting that data, and what are they going to do with it? So let's look at 4 quick examples. 2017, Google released Google Clips, a camera in your home that uses facial recognition to make sure that every moment is captured, or key moments are captured for your child. So if that's what you're interested in, that's a great tool for that. And if you're worried about missing moments, then that would be a good tool to use. I'm just going to scan through them. Just bear with me. There was a school, New York, an example, 2018, cameras set up to detect through facial recognition strangers in the school. We have school shootings, so if somebody is on campus who shouldn't be there, it could pick it up. It could also see guns that are showing. So again, under the kind of label of security and safety, facial recognition being used. Missing children in India in 4 hours. The Delhi police worked with facial recognition databases and systems and identified 3,000 missing children. So a great use case of how it was used for good. And then a classroom in China, and I know that there's research being done on this in the US as well, analyzing student faces in the classroom and detecting emotions and detecting activities. So who looks confused, who's nodding, who understands, who's happy, who's sad. And ultimately to try and improve education. Again, these are good use cases. You could also argue that they're very dangerous use cases. And so the point is really that without the right guardrails and policies in place, these systems can both kind of empower and also restrict. These are some of the rights that would be impacted upon. third use case, robotic toys. Toys that listen to children, that children talk to. That data is being stored in a cloud and belongs to the toy maker right now. And so what happens when a child says something like, you know, I hate myself, or I'm thinking of killing myself? Who's responsible for actually acting upon that? And some of the toys, when they hear that, they just go, that's something you should talk to an adult about. But is there a duty to, you know, a duty to protect? And the last use case is YouTube Kids. And again, you know, in the paper, these are all kind of expanded on a lot more. But this is a great example of how you have a system, it's a recommendation engine, you have millions of videos in YouTube Kids. It's for users 13 and below. Not one of those videos is hand-curated by a human. It's all algorithm-based. And Google published a paper that gives you a bit of an indication of how they take millions of videos and filter them down to hundreds and then present the next 12 that you should watch. And it's based on your user history and your context and other candidate sources, which we don't really understand what that is. But it's interesting that to serve up your next videos, the system is watching you as much as you're watching it. And again, what does that mean for children as users? So not to hit on Google or YouTube, this is just an example of where kind of user privacy and kind of user enjoyment and leisure can come into conflict. So the report makes some recommendations. I don't have much time, but what you see is that, I think what's important here is that there are recommendations for parents, for corporates, for educators. So there's a whole ecosystem around AI and child rights. And people are touched and organizations are touched on different levels. There are also recommendations for governments. And the one that I wanted to pick up on lastly was to integrate children's rights into national plans. So there are, at the moment, a number of countries with national AI strategies and plans. There was a great paper released in December by CIFAR from Canada that analyzed 18 of the existing plans, and they're probably now more like about 30 or so in the world. You can see the problem here. Most of them are in developed countries. It's not very spread out. So most of the world does not have an AI strategy or a plan in place, which is fine. You know, this is a fairly new area, but as this area expands and as AI becomes more pervasive, the strategies and plans need to catch up quickly. This is also interesting from that same report. They looked at the 18 and kind of categorized where the focus is in terms of their own heat map. You can see that inclusion in terms of national AI strategies and plans is very weak. And that's often where child rights come in. So basically the title of the slide was AI and Child Rights, it's urgent, and this is why. And so UNICEF with partners, with the IEEE, with the Harvard Berkman Klein Center for the Internet and Society at Harvard, and with anybody here who would like to join us on this journey, is developing some policy guidelines to help governments, as they develop their national AI strategies and policies, think about child rights, and think about usage cases, and think about rights that are impacted. The project is just starting. We're having a workshop next month in New York as a launch workshop. But we want to spend the next year developing these guidelines in a very consultative process, getting input from academia, from corporates, from governments, from around the world, not just kind of Europe and North America. And then we want to launch those guidelines and work with governments and companies to pilot those and to give us feedback. Because there's always tension, you know, there are guidelines and there are rights, but with AI, rights come into conflict. I'll give you a quick example. One of the UNICEF invests in startups. One of the startups that we invested in uses AI for health purposes and developed an algorithm that they were testing that could look at a group of children and based on their faces, give an indication of the malnutrition levels or nutrition levels of that group. You know, usually malnutrition is measured by a kind of a little band that you put around the arm, and it's kind of red, yellow, and green. But imagine you could do that at scale. So the pilot was in Tanzania, and in the end, it wasn't so successful because basically they couldn't find enough faces to train the algorithm. And at the end of the project, they had to destroy the data, and that's the legal framework in that country. But the question is, you have the right to privacy, which won out in that case, but you also have the right to health, and a system that could really promote your right to health. And so the point is that we need to pilot these guidelines because different countries, different contexts, different sectors are going to have to make tough decisions around how they're implemented. And we're looking for those use cases. So that's it. Here's my contact details. I'm around for the whole week. Please come and chat to me if you want to be a part of this work. Thank you.
I think we'll take some audience questions. I don't think anyone's using Pigeonhole. So we'll just open it up to the floor.
I want to ask you a question about the use of AI for education. It's a little bit aside from the more core problems and basic rights and so on. But thinking about the future, if we implement a lot of AI for education, it might become very standardized. And is it a threat to human diversity?
That's a really good question. You know, for years we've been trying to get personalized education in a classroom setting, and you know that in wealthier schools, often your ratio of your students to your teacher is quite low, so that the teacher can really spend time with each person. So this is what AI promises, but it's a good point because it's again there's a tension. You know, if everybody's kind of on the one hand getting personalized attention, but at the same time getting this kind of standardized testing. I think your question is more about, is standardized testing a good idea? And is there a risk that they kind of, yeah, the pedagogy and, so these are tensions. I'm sorry, I don't have a kind of a good answer, but I think this is what we need to try and weigh up. On the one hand, to get everybody to kind of honor the right to a quality education that's free, that's accessible, that's equitable, but at the same time respect each person's diversity. So I'm not sure AI seems to promise this personalization, but there's also a risk. I've had discussions with people that if everything is automated, do you have enough face-to-face interaction? And a lot of the benefit of a school setting, for example, or a learning setting is that you actually talk to each other and you learn from each other. And if everyone's just talking to a machine, even if it is personalized to you, would you lose that? And I think you would. And so I think with all of these things, you need a real balance between when you switch off and when you're on. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to hear your thoughts on teacher training, and do you think we are prepared to train the next generations of teachers that will deal with AI in their classrooms and their pedagogical methods?
So that's, again, a really good question. And so I'm from South Africa. Like many developing countries, education really struggles there. You know, we have a situation where teachers are either underqualified or unqualified. And so we really need to invest a lot of time in teacher training. And sometimes if you see kind of how kind of basic the situation is on the ground, you kind of think, well, shouldn't we just focus on the basics of like strengthening content knowledge and pedagogy before we start layering in these AI topics? I think that, and systems, I think that we need both. I've always thought of education or technology and education as as a spectrum. If you lay in too much technology to a situation that can't absorb that technology, that people don't have the skills or the capacity, then it can do more harm than good. So we need to kind of, you know, scaffold teachers especially up to a point where the AI is helping. I think that teachers are ready. But I think that, you know, there's a real existential context to all of this, to this whole event and to AI, that are human beings handing over control to the machine? And although it doesn't get spoken of much now because it's such a fuzzy concept, people probably feel it at the back of their minds, and teachers would feel that especially. Even technology and education, there has been a kind of a feeling of being threatened, and the role of the teacher versus the tech isn't always that clear. And so we have to keep the teacher front and center, say what is your role and what is the role of the technology and how can it help you? The last thing, there was an interesting report from PwC about 2 or 3 years ago that looked at which jobs could be, okay, thank you. My last point, which jobs could be threatened by AI. And they basically said that jobs that involve kind of quite predictable, monotonous kind of actions that can be automated, those are at risk. Whereas, and they mentioned teachers and nurses and situations where people are interfacing with other people, where you need sympathy and empathy and understanding, are not so much at risk. And perhaps that's the kind of angle that we need to kind of really focus on. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Hello. My name is Cathy Baxter, and I am Architect of Ethical AI Practice at Salesforce. So this is my miracle. She reminds me each and every day why I do what I do. It is so critical, the work that we are doing today, because the environment that she grows up in is going to be incredibly different from the environment I grew up in. I want to make sure that she has the same opportunities, rights, and world that she deserves, that all of our children deserve. And it reminds me, as I think about parenting my child and as I work in AI, that raising a child is very similar to creating and raising AI systems. If we want AI that is productive, that it contributes to society, then we must raise it with that same kind of care, attention, and love, or else we are going to be surrounded by delinquent AI children, and none of us are going to want that. I'm sure all of you have seen many headlines identical to this, and we've probably wondered why this is. When you start digging into the background and why these systems ended up causing the harm that it did, we find that it wasn't intentional. There's not malice here. They didn't actually want to deny people the health care that they deserve or loans that they should have access to. They actually were using AI with a goal of removing bias and subjectivity in the decision making. The problem is when they were designing and creating and implementing these AI systems, they didn't do it with the same care, love, and attention that they should have. And so we have our delinquent AI children. So I wanted to share with you 5 parenting lessons that I've learned in my time. The first is an African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. Just as it takes many, many people in the community around us to raise children, to be productive members of society, the same is true with AI. It takes a vast number of people to design, create, implement, and then manage AI systems. And so we have to think about who are those people that have the influence over the AI systems. Diversity makes us smarter. Research shows that diverse teams are harder working, more creative, and smarter. And so we need diversity on the teams that create AI systems. We know there's a diversity crisis today. There's a small number of women, 10 to 15% of the AI creators in the major tech firms are women. And for minorities, the numbers are even more atrocious. And that has to change. Because if there is a lack of diversity on those teams, the AI systems are going to reflect that lack of diversity. And that is going to cause harm for us all. Here is a tweet from a few days ago, that I think speaks to this perfectly. Today in technology, my food tracker won't let me compensate for breastfeeding. My sleep tracker thinks I'm waking 4 times a night to check Facebook. Unrelated, diversity and product development teams. So for any of the moms out here, you know these trackers, these health trackers, they can do amazing things. You know, they can predict your blood alcohol content level, which is kind of banana pants, but it can't track a woman's needs once a month. It is ridiculous that 50% of the population are left out of these health trackers. That's just not acceptable. Lesson number 2, show me your friends and I'll show you your character. This is another African proverb that I love, and I say it to my daughter all the time. We know that the kids, our kids hang out with, have a huge influence over who they are, what they do. And it's the same thing for AI systems. We have to create ethical cultures and mindsets within the companies that are creating and implementing AI systems. It is not enough to have a set of principles. We have to take a top-down and bottoms-up approach to have a holistic ethical culture. We can train students in CS programs to think about asking the questions of not, can we do this, but should we do this? We can teach employees to think about how to develop and work ethically. But if we don't also have that top-down approach, support from management, creating incentive structures that reward that ethical behavior, it doesn't matter. Tristan Harris often talks about the dopamine economy and the extraction economy, where the tools and things that companies build are all about how much can they get out of their users. Clicks on ads, how many hours are you spending on that product? How much ad revenue are they getting out of you? That isn't an incentive structure to work ethically. We have to think of new incentive structures that reward the right behaviors. We have to have company policies and priorities that say profits by any cost necessary is not the way to do business. Not anymore. Number 3, I'm sure we've all heard from one point from those around us, do as I say, not as I do. But we know that that's not the case. Kids mirror the behaviors that they see around them. They mimic us. They're going to do as we do. And the same is true for AI systems. We may want it to do a particular thing. We may try to embed rules to tell it to do a certain thing, but it is going to mirror the behaviors that it is exposed to. And so that means training data. We have to remove bias from our business processes as well as our training data. So here's one of the headlines from the beginning. Will using artificial intelligence to make loans trade one kind of bias for another? Yes. If we don't change our business processes, AI is not going to magically wipe away that bias. A study in October 2018 found that financial institutions that make face-to-face loans charge Latinx and African American borrowers 6 to 9 points more on mortgage rates than Caucasian applicants. That results in $250 to $500 million more per year that they are paying in extra mortgage payments, interest payments. So it's not surprising that if this is happening in the business processes, it goes into that training data, it goes into the automated systems, and then it gets replicated. And the very systems that we hoped would remove the bias simply replicate it. 4, give encouragement and feedback. It's easy to be critical. I spend a lot of my day doing that. But we also have to provide encouragement. We have to give feedback. Children don't always know when they do things wrong, and neither is going to be an AI system. If you simply let it run and don't give it feedback, it's not going to know what it should keep doing more of and stop doing or do less of. So we've got to give it feedback. That means that you have to create explicit feedback mechanisms and evaluate the impact that it's having often. So again, let's take a look at the headlines that we saw earlier. We saw examples of when algorithms cut healthcare. This happened in multiple states across the US. Allegheny County in Pennsylvania in the US used an AI system to try to predict which children were at the highest risk of child abuse so that their cases could be prioritized. And then, of course, we have the Compass parole recommendation system. And California had recently passed, but has put a pause on using AI to make bail recommendations. When we see our public sector institutions using AI to make decisions, we have to hope that there is going to be the right checks and balances in place, that they are collecting feedback. Oops. Unfortunately, that isn't happening. It is taking the ACLU or investigative reporters like ProPublica digging in and finding out why are these decisions being made, and then go and give that feedback to the institutions to figure out, okay, how can we change this? How can we ensure that people are being protected? This is about human rights. We're talking about freedom and justice, access to healthcare, access to housing. These are huge issues. We're not talking about recommendations on Amazon and Netflix. These are human rights issues, and we have to demand that when our government institutions are using AI to make these decisions about us, that they have feedback mechanisms, that they take that time to find out what are the impacts that are having. Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? Finally, we have to parent with love. This can't just be a job. We're talking about AI at scale that is impacting society at a rate and a level that we have never seen before. And so we need to love our AI systems. We need to give it the love that we would give our children, because it takes that level of time and effort to get it right. In Illinois, in one of the examples about cutting healthcare, they found that there were 900 incorrect rules programmed into the system. I don't even know how the thing functioned. That's not okay. That's ridiculous. So again, we have to monitor what is happening and continually retrain. This is not set and forget. This is not let's build it and then it's going to do what we want it to do. We have to make sure that it's doing what it is supposed to be doing and fix it when it is not. Final quote. Your children will become who you are, so be the person that you want them to grow up to be. Thank you. Questions? No questions. Come on, that's got to generate something. All right.
Hi, I wanted to go back to the point about giving encouragement and feedback to AI, because I think that also is linked to the idea of accountability when something goes wrong. And AI can't exactly be held accountable because it's just following whatever we humans fed it and the data that we give it and what we've taught it to do. So in cases where AI actually brings harm to children, which is something that's very critical, who do we hold accountable for it?
So anything that has legal implications, like regulated industries like financial services, healthcare, there is an expectation that there will be some type of auditing mechanism, so that if the regulators come in and they want to know why a particular system did what it did, they have to be able to provide those records to regulators. I think this is an area of open question right now. The different government regulators, they're trying to figure out what does that look like, because the technology is all over the place. We don't have a standard for it. We need to develop a standard for it. Some of the work, like model cards, for models like nutrition labels, that work by Meg Mitchell. There is data sheets for data sets, Varshney from IBM. There are a number of different recommendations for how companies should be documenting what a model does, what the training data set looks like. But we also need to have an audit log to be able to go back in time and understand what happened and when.
Let's see whether this works. Yes.
Ooh,
I
fancy.
took the previous question to be something quite different.
Oh, okay.
Namely that if you have a robot, let's say in a classroom or as a home robot interacting with a child, with an adult, and either saying something inappropriate or doing something, and let's not even think about bodily injury, just being demeaning in a way that is perceived to be that way. The question is, can you give feedback to that robot so that it changes its behavior rather than sending it back to the manufacturer and doing an audit and then 2 months later you get it back. So I think the idea would be, and I absolutely agree with your basic premise, that we have to treat robots as if they were children, in the sense that we have to give them feedback, they have to learn. Now, we are far away in our algorithms for anything like that to do, but at least that should be the goal, and that would answer the question. And accountability is not the issue. The question is correctability.
Yes. Yeah, without a doubt. Yes. So if you don't have a way in your system to for the child to be able to say, that hurt my feelings. What you just said scared me, and then be able to have notifications. There needs to be an alert. You can't just log it. There then needs to be some action that happens that triggers something. And so there was a presentation by someone who's on the team for Microsoft Cortana. And they know that people will taunt their smart devices at home. And so if someone is cursing at it or asking really inappropriate questions, then it will respond, I don't think that that's a polite question, or that's, I'm not going to answer that question. If somebody says it again, then they'll say, moving on, and then a third time, they just stop responding. They're not going to reward or create a game with that toxic individual that's trying to bait the system. So we need to have ways to be able to respond to feedback, but there has to be not just logging that, yes, here's we're getting these kinds of queries into the system, but be able to trigger an alert and say, okay, we're seeing this type of feedback coming from the system. What do we do about it? Is there time for one more? Okay.
Hi, many thanks for your presentation. I'm Sasha Nonnecke. I'm an AI policy researcher at the Future Society. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was very interesting that you mentioned audits, because in the AI policy field, it's been a subject of the debate of knowing whether it's time now, trying to implement international auditing standards. And I guess one of the tricky questions, really knowing who should implement these audits. Should it be, the government? Should it be consulting companies who have more expertise from this, from financial auditing? Should it be independent body? And also taking into account if ever it's like we think it should be done by governments, how international can it be? And if ever it was to be developed by authoritarian government, how reliable would it be?
Yeah, I mean, the question of regulation is, and policies and auditing is a huge one that we haven't figured out yet. So how do we come together and figure out what the appropriate standards are? Not all AI systems necessarily need the same level of auditing and regulation. So self-driving cars, facial recognition, very different from, the AI that recommends what movie you should be seeing next. And I think one of the things that gets lost in some of the conversations is speaking of AI as just like one monolithic technology, when it's not. It's incredibly diverse in what it can do and its applications. And we are seeing movement in the US and other countries to figure out how do we begin thinking about how different agencies regulate it. But I think we're far from creating standards for what does that look like. And there's going to be pushback from companies that have concerns about proprietary technology. They don't want to open up the box. And there's going to be, I think, a lot of there's going to be some pushback from some that don't want to be as transparent as what we might need in order to understand what is it doing. I saw your hand in the back.
Thanks very much. So this is conceptually very broad, so I'll try to make it answerable by giving a specific implementation. So I'm a parent, and I have a teenage child who's a member of the LGBT community. And I'm seeing many, many cases where my children are interacting with AI in a variety of modalities. The one that I'd like to specifically ask you about is the implementations of AI in content filtration in YouTube, for example. You know, obviously, there's a lot can be said about that corporation's standards of ethics, but I'll skip that one. Most of what YouTube considers to be harmful content is intercepted and taken down by AI before it ever goes up or very shortly thereafter. In things like violence, it's pretty much effective, and as a parent, I'm pretty much okay with that. But it's notoriously bad at flagging and filtering LGBT content and telling the difference between what is educational and relatively acceptable and beneficial and what it should take down. We've had several rounds of scandals where there's mass culling of what a human would determine as beneficial LGBT content from these channels by AI in ways that are, in my view, fundamentally harmful to the community. As a parent, when I go in to audit that technology and my children's interactions with that AI, I see practically no hooks. And therefore, so far, I've been compensating by being an extra vigilant parent and talking to my children in the human world about what to do and making sure they're getting access to information. But it appears to me that this is a specific example of where AI is tremendously failing in terms of having inclusive, diverse societies and proper parental oversight, for whatever that term could mean. So I'd like to get your thoughts specifically on how AI is functioning here, what parents should do, and what governments should do. Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes this crosses into values statements. And so, what I might find acceptable content for my child to learn about LGBTQ issues, other parents may be incredibly uncomfortable with and not be supportive at all. And so how do we identify what the barriers are of what we feel is safe and appropriate for our children, and create really those kinds of personalized guardrails for our kids? That's incredibly difficult. In Netflix, I was trying to go in and see what the controls were because there were a couple of shows and movies that I did not want my daughter to see. And the settings are so broad, it was either, she can watch Dora the Explorer or she can watch these other shows that I really did not want her to see. There's no way to tag individual movies or shows or content and say she shouldn't be able to watch these or, similar types of things. And so companies really need to, I think, engage much more with the individual communities that it impacts and think about what are the right settings, what are the right controls that we need to have for ourselves generally, but most especially for our children. And I think that goes back to the incentive structures and thinking about how do we move away from this extractive economy, and how do we think about what it is, what the reward is. How do we recognize if we are providing the right content, and it's not just about number of hours watched. Like we know from the extremist videos, those are extremely sticky. And so YouTube will begin providing more and more and more. And so if you've watched one type of extremist content, then they'll start showing other type of extremist content to you. And just because you're watching it, is that the right signal? Is that the reward back to the company to say, oh, wow, yeah, we should give more of this kind of content because people are really watching it? So it comes back to thinking about what the incentive structure is. What do we use to measure I'm sorry.
You're fine. No,
Thank
perfect answer, but I want to make sure the others.
Yes, all right, thank you.
No, thank you. Rebecca?
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for attending. And my name is Rebecca. I belong to UNHCR Innovation Service Team. We're a team that is dedicated to drive and foster innovation across the organization. And today I'm going to talk very specifically about some concrete recommendations that we have learned precisely working with vulnerable communities, in our case, forcibly displaced people, refugees, and some ethical considerations that you need to have into account when you are building automated decision-making systems. Next, please. An automated decision-making system, ADM, so it's the acronym that I have. We are full of acronyms. It's a process. It's a computerized process that some of the components of the process are fully computerized. Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry, I have it here. Fully computerized, and the other ones are maybe even just assisting a human decision maker or fully replacing them. For those AI experts in the room, you probably know some of these examples. For the humanitarians I'm seeing around, you probably don't know them. So I'm going to explain concrete examples on replacing almost human decision making and the fatal consequence that it had. The first case is Uber. As you might know, Uber was testing self-driving cars around the United States. And self-driving cars are basically designed with algorithms in mind that are respecting the rules of traffic. And in normal and perfect conditions, cars don't have, actually even drive better than humans that tend to, go ahead people and honk and stuff. What happened in this specific case is that a pedestrian actually crossed at night in a non-pedestrian pathway. It was crossing and pushing a bicycle. So the machine didn't have enough time to react and to actually make the emergency brake before it hit the pedestrian and actually kill. Elaine Hesper was a pedestrian, killed on the accident. It was like the replacement of the human that actually killed that, but also the inability to see unexpected surprises. The second case is the case of Compass, the case that probably you know. It's a case of a risk assessment system to assess the propensity for a person that already committed a minor crime to commit a crime again. This system, Compass, was used for some cases, for example, for, the sentence, to see if they reduce it or they amend the sentence, or to set bonds. And what it ended up is being very, very racist. Why? Because the historical data that it was fed with the system was fed for it come from correctional facilities or people that committed repetitive crimes. And as you might know, some of the correctional facilities are full of minorities. So the system was given a higher rate to minorities that were more propense to commit a crime than to other people. The third case is the case of Porfirio Mejia in New York City. So Porfirio is a small shop owner, and he runs some, with a food stamp program, also runs some IOUs credits, which is credit to poor and vulnerable people. So it's you pay them back whenever you have money. So when the government automated the food stamp program evaluation with AI, Porfirio actually lost the license to use food stamp. Why? Because the IOUs, which is an informal credit system, was confused by the system by fraud. And he lost almost 35% of his clientele as well. And what does it have to do this with humanitarians? Well, I'm here representing an agency whose mission is to actually provide protection of people that are extremely vulnerable when they're fleeing from their lives, when they're fleeing their homes because of conflict, when they're fleeing because of persecution. And it is on mandate to provide that protection to the people. What happens is when you're trying to automate decisions that humanitarians actually take on an everyday life basis when they're trying to, for example, provide assistance to them or allocate them to a safe country. And for that, I'm going to go back to ethics. And we talk about ethics. It's a very, very complex context. I'm going to talk to you about ethics in the humanitarian setting. So the way humanitarians make decisions, the way it's summarized between these two guys, and one is the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, and the other one is the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham. So Kant says, with the categorical imperative, it's called, that your actions and your decision-making processes are going to be evaluated according to the fulfillment of your duty. That means, in our case, the ability to actually protect people that are fleeing, right? And in the other side, you have Bentham telling you your decision-making process, your actions are going to be based on the consequence that that decision has. So in that middle, we have humanitarian decision making, which is a process of evaluating, making judgments of every action that you're going to take that could potentially impact the lives of thousands, especially those who are extremely vulnerable, that can suffer human rights abuses, that actually, if you turn them back, they can suffer inhuman treatment, torture, and even be deprived of life, like a lot of refugees. And that, upon your course of action, is the one that you're going to be judged. So, what does it have to do with humanitarian decision making, and why is it so difficult to make decisions? I'm going to go back to your Netflix account, which is actually portraying a bit of algorithm decision making. So Netflix is fed with your historical data of your choices, that you have watched movies before, and it fits you, your top picks, or because you watched this movie, etc. So why is it so difficult to choose one movie? You spend hours scrolling down the thing to choose one movie, and I'm going to tell you why, and this is why humanitarians face. Because you have very little information to make a decision. The information that you have is either algorithmic, which is a number, a percentage of match according to your historical preferences, or only a paragraph that says the movie, the description, or a video, if you're lucky, if it's a Netflix production. Well, this translated to the humanitarian world, when we need to make decisions with very little information, in less than 72 hours, when the people are just coming in, and the decisions that were faced by humanitarians are something like, okay, in this area, there's a population that is extremely malnourished, and if we don't serve food or assistance there, they're going to die. But we also know that the armed forces there, so they can hijack the food and give it to the soldiers. What do we do? And decide quickly, because they can die in any given second for either food or the armed forces. Second one could be the doctors, the humanitarian doctors, the ability for them to save lives, and that's the categorical imperative for them, to be able to save lives. But what about if the life of that person is a combatant? And you know that as soon as you cure them, they're going to go back and probably injure more people. Or humanitarians are working with children in armed conflict zones that are putting them in a safe space, safe haven, a school, and give them an education and recreational facilities just to be hijacked later from a forced recruitment group that can actually make them child soldiers because you put them together, easy for them to be praised. This is what we face. And there's a tendency right now in governments, in organizations, in private sector companies to actually use AI on the sake of efficiency, actually to make their processes more efficient, to make them save money, to actually get rid of the backlog, and make more evidence decision making. But on the other side are the people that are being impacted by these systems at the very end, that don't have anything to do with those processes, but just are the receiving end. These people, we need to learn to put their interests and needs first. This gap actually that is happening right now, which is very, very paradoxical, because the paradox is we're entering into a world that is very fast-paced, that is turning into the AI to do all these things, getting rid sometimes of the human, while the humans on the other side are the ones that need it. And actually, for example, like the case of Porfirio Mejia, the food stamp guy, the people that were receiving credit were writing to the government food stamp program to put him back into the program, handwritten letters, and nothing happened. That was feedback that was given to the government, and nothing happened because of this precise gap. For this reason, we are recommending, we call them the 7 ethical considerations for building automated decision-making systems. And these considerations are actually, we believe, and we have encountered them actually working with refugees, or other international organizations, our field operations on the ground, that they can build trust in your AI systems. If you're building them, if you're using companies to build them, but also if they're also mimicking, like for example, echoing the Article 22 of GDPR, where it says that machines or automated decision-making system shouldn't be solely making decisions, only machines, on behalf of vulnerable people, but also that has legal and profiling implications to them. So the first case that I'm going to talk about with the ethical consideration is inclusion of those who are most at risk as priority. Is the case of resettlement. I don't know if you read, there's a recent case from Stanford University. It's a study that they did with historical data for resettlement of refugees in United States and Switzerland. And the case study provides, for example, good information on geographical, better locations for geographical allocation of refugees into certain communities, given the chances to have higher employment, economic integration. And in this case, why is it important to include more and include many and include the most at risk? Because in the case of refugees in resettlement, it's not only about economic integration. Yes, chances for getting employment could give for more human rights, but social integration, the ability for them to find a friend in a community, to speak the language, to have access to education, to have health, is also very important, or legal integration. And so that's one of the cases. The other case that we actually know, it's refugee status determination. There was a study from Toronto University, a citizen lab, that is actually flagging the dangers of having AI. The study is called What's at the Gate, in case you want to read it. And putting AI in a fully automated decision way to select who is a refugee or migrant or not. Why? Because, for example, if you train the rules of AI and you tell them that they're safe countries, and maybe someone is not fleeing from a war-torn country, maybe someone is fleeing for persecution because they belong to an ethnic group or LGBTI community and they're facing violence. And so maybe that application can be not mainstream into the accelerated route, and instead is going to be probably detracted. For in this case, you appeal to fairness of the system and integrity. Fairness, for example, when humans make two decisions that are like competing against each other, the machine can act even as another third judge, which is like bringing more evidence to those cases when two human officers at the border are not agreeing. Or the integrity part. Instead of like choosing for the humans, maybe they can just support the human to streamline the cases. For example, put simplified here, the more merge applications. We have the guidelines for refugee status determination. So classify these applications and flag the ones that are more vulnerable. Emergency preparedness, which is something that we do at the agency. We actually, the innovation team is the one that encountered this issue on why it's important to include diverse and open conversations. We are experimenting with predictive analytics, specifically to predict the number of people fleeing from conflict. In the case study that we had is Somalia, using AI. And we had some variables that we thought were important for AI machine to read, to be able to predict the number of arrivals for IDPs, internally displaced people, and refugees in the southern border. And the variables were related to climate, the variables were related to conflict and to displacement in general, 7 years of data. What happens is that when we went into the ground, we actually talked to refugees in the border with Ethiopia and Somalia. In the openness of what is wrong with our system, they told us, you know what, you're missing one very important variable for displacement. And we were like, actually, I was there in the interviews, like, which one? Well, the goats. We don't flee with the goats. The market prices are important for them because they sell the goats before fleeing, so the market gets flooded with goats. The goats drop. And when we input 7 years of goats market data, the model holds. And this is the why is that you need to have diversity of thought. Refugees told us here at HQ how a predictive analytics system works. In the last case, which is not related to AI, but is related to technology solutions, and in the case AI should actually have it, which is the issue of transparency and dignity of these vulnerable communities. And transparency, for example, in the registration, when you do registration, governments usually do it in the borders, but when the government capacity is overwhelmed, UNHCR supports that registration of people. And there's the use of biometrics, and this is how one of the systems looks like. And one of the things that the team of registration discovered in several places is that refugees wanted to know what was happening with their data. So we need to do informed consent, have a standard operating procedure. What is the data going to? Where is it being stored? What is happening? Who's going to be shared to? So because of those focus groups with refugees, now as a standard operating procedure for any registration officer in UNHCR, you need to sit right next to the refugee for them to be able to see where is the data storage, how does the system look like, where the biometrics are getting, and they need to explain them. And the one is the dignity part, which is also in the introduction of new technologies. The team said that at some point they were putting the fingerprints, and you know the fingerprints have like green and red color, where the red color, when they couldn't capture the image, the refugees were asking, what is wrong with my fingers? And the team were like, oh, no, there's nothing wrong. I mean, it's just not being captured. So they needed to modify the system to black and white, just to tell, dignifying the solution. It's not your fingers that are wrong, it's our system that is wrong. So just to summarize, these are some of the recommendations that we encourage you to have when you're building an automated decision-making system for vulnerable people. First, stop. Pause everything that you're doing and take a moment to reflect, because you're feeling KPIs, you're trying to do the system fast and complying with your donors, etc. Reflect that. Ask yourself questions, ask your team questions, questions your assumptions, question your own bias. You come from a very typical probably background with certain cultural baggage, with certain education from a certain country. You have yourself bias. So you ask them and ask your team, unveil them, even write it. I actually make our team to write it in a process, in a diagram. Praise the watchdogs. The watchdogs are the ones that are going to give you some good recommendations. Adapt your system and revise your metrics of success. This is a very long one. I'm not going to go into detail. It's just very practical. So what can I do right now? These ethical considerations. Well, if you're designers of the system, document your process, document it, blog about it, flag that you're building these systems for other people to know what you're working on. Be transparent about it. Be open. If you can open your methodology, your algorithms, if your data is actually not protected or it doesn't harm public privacy data, in this case, also share the data, aggregated, anonymized. And finally, be humble. Precisely for building systems for vulnerable communities, you need to be humble and you need to ask them, the people that are going to be the most affected at the end, how to improve your system. Thank you very much. I was worried that I'm not a native speaker, so I was like, is this capturing my accent?
Thanks again for your presentation. You raised some really crucial points. It was very interesting to hear. I have a question regarding your 7 ethical principles. I thought it was very interesting because it's also some overlap with some of the many other principles and guidelines published recently, which also touch on human rights. So it's interesting to hear how you see, conversions towards this. And the second question, because you're a data scientist, and because one of the main problems really links to algorithmic bias, is how do you change this? Because if ever, we have to use some data sets such as ImageNet, which is the one we use the most for computer vision, and you have 45% of the data coming from the United States, home to 4% of the population, and 3% of the data coming from US and from China and India, home to 1/3 of the world population, then, of course, it's not going to be representative, it's going to be biased. And what are the pragmatic solutions, to really try and change this from the roots?
So the double question. The first one, yes, I try to peel a bit on the values and ethical values also that we have as humanitarians. We're guided by the SPHERE principles, the 4 humanitarian principles of the SPHERE handbook. We have our own set of rules when we're dealing with humans. So I think why not we cannot translate some of them into the machine world, right? So that's some of them. And there are many guidance and frameworks for ethical. I just mentioned some of them that we have encountered personally with the team or with the teams on the ground with refugees. And on the second question, as data scientist, so I'm actually a social scientist by formation. I was illiterate in coding until 5 years ago, when I just suddenly would ramp into statistics and code programming. And so in that social scientist, I have a hybrid, what we call them the bilinguals. I think Stefan I'm from New York City University, NYU. They call the bilinguals people that can speak 2 languages. No, in my case, is a humanitarian. I work as a humanitarian in the development sector, but also as data scientist. The issue of the quality of data, especially in humanitarian context, it's actually I learned how to do imputation. Imputation for non-technical people is how to clean data and make up for the missing variables. Before I was doing modeling, etc., because there's a lot of data missing in the humanitarian sector. Still, there's data, and so you need to be able to make the best out of the few things that you have, and search for it, because there is, maybe in a computer of some humanitarian organization, maybe there is in historical files, but a lot of people, I think they're going for the easy sources of data because they're there and it's easier to clean. And the thing that we do the most as data scientists in the humanitarian sector or development sector is to clean a lot of the data that is in non-machine readable formats. But it is there. I mean, I've cleaned hundreds of PDFs for the Somalia project, and because the information was in PDF for how many people arrived, because it cannot be modified, so it cannot be in, I don't know, in another thing. So later on, we pass it to JSON, for example. But yes, it is a struggle. So if you are interested in helping humanitarians, you can also develop AI techniques for us, for example, to clean historical records or archives, handwritten notes that we have from field operations. That will be interesting, basically.
Thank you. We'll move to our last speaker, Ecem.
Okay. Hello everyone, my name is Ecem Yılmazhaliloğlu. I'm a high school student from Turkey, an AI4 alum, and a founder of Technoladies. Before I proceed my speech, I'd first like to thank AI for All, Stanford and ITU for the honor of being given this opportunity, which I'm planning to take full advantage of, to talk about inclusion in AI, a topic that is quite personal for me. Even though I've been to a lot of modern United Nations conferences, I've never attended a real Beyond conference before, so please excuse me if I'm a bit stressed or outright terrified. But sincerely, it is a great privilege to be here with you today, and I'm thrilled to say that for the following 15 minutes, I'll be talking about why inclusion is critical in AI development. I'd like to start by showing you an image. Does anyone else feel uncomfortable looking at it? It's a mess, right? There is no unity, no harmony, nothing other than chaos. And now this one is somehow satisfying. You can see the beautiful picture that only appears when those scattered different pieces come together. I think of each individual, each background, each gender, race, and ethnicity as unique pieces of this puzzle. In order to reveal the bigger picture, they have to work together, because they all have an idea, an experience, a talent that the others don't. Diversity within them is what creates originality and creativity in the final picture. And inclusion is the only way for them to harness the advantage of their differences, to create a beautiful harmony, to make up something extraordinary that will perhaps affect each of their lives. So I say, to achieve something exceptional, we need to include all the pieces. AI is developing more rapidly than ever. It is estimated that by 2030, AI will have added $15 trillion to the world economy. According to the World Intellectual Property Organization, the number of AI patents have spiked, indicating a significant increase in AI-based products that will fundamentally change our lives. We can already see the signs of this massive change. AI is already a big part of our lives. It's our personal assistant, our customer support, language translator, and even personal doctor. AI has great potential to solve numerous pressing issues from different fields efficiently. AI can provide critical services for the well-being of humans, such as assisting with disaster relief, in advocating healthcare, and in enhancing agriculture. The possibilities are boundless, and the bigger picture that can be created with AI is beyond imagination. However, many people can't be a part of this thrilling concept because of the various barriers they face, because of their differences. Women, people of color, and other marginalized groups are currently excluded from the right to be a part of the future, their own future. What makes these groups is actually what makes them unique. Sadly, we continuously fail to recognize this. We interpret difference as a negative factor rather than an extremely valuable one, and this has an unfavorable impact on both AI and technology industries. To talk in numbers, only 25% of all computing jobs are held by women, and this number has been decreasing steadily. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, 83% of tech executives are white. Any other groups only compose of the remaining 17% in the US. The numbers are even lower in the AI industry. A recent World Economic Forum report has revealed that only 22% of all AI professionals globally are female, compared to 78% who are male. These statistics are devastating. They point out the lack of diversity in AI, the problem that is known as a diversity crisis. Many of the pieces are still missing from our puzzle. As AI slowly takes its place in our lives, it also starts to undertake different tasks. It starts to decide who is going to get an interview for the job, who is more likely to recommit a crime, or who will be left alone. And that's where it becomes dangerous, where the diversity crisis in AI shows itself as bias. And if we do not intervene, this bias can pose a serious risk for now and in the future. A few years ago, a large tech company experimented using an AI system to sift through the applicants' resumes and identify the most likely recruitments. They trained the system with 10 years worth of recruitment data to assess the current applicants accordingly. Of course, this data that was fed into the system was highly male-dominated, reflecting the current situation of this industry in general. Do you know what the AI learned by following the pattern in the data? To penalize resumes containing the word women. Thus, it started penalizing the female applicants while favoring males, and became a clear example of AI and bias in the AI systems, reinforcing the very inequalities that it was created to overcome. This bias in AI development occurs for various reasons, which at their core all stem from a lack of diversity and inclusion among those creating the AI systems. These reasons can be data with unequal representation or simply unintentional assumptions embedded in the developer's algorithm, which all originate from the diversity crisis, or in other words, the missing pieces in the AI puzzle. I particularly want to talk about the data with unequal representation and intentional assumptions embedded in the developer's algorithm, and hopefully how to mitigate them. Like in the previous example, it all comes back to data inputs. If this data doesn't represent people from different genders, ethnicities, and races, and other variables equally, if it discriminates against people, then it further oppresses the marginalized and underrepresented groups. In order to achieve inclusion, data training sets should be diverse and of equal representation, so that AI can perceive the society as it is, not as it is made to look like. And perhaps, of course, be fairer to all people in this way. We should be more, as to the developer's unintentional bias, it is human nature to make quick judgments. We should be more careful about it, yes. But the solution for this issue, again, lies in diversity and teamwork. Different people with different perspectives and abilities can detect their teammates' mistakes and fix them. So the more diverse your team is, the fewer undetected mistakes there may be. Thus, the future of AI is hidden in diversity. And how we can achieve it is the following: by ensuring equal representation and inclusion in the development of AI systems. As I mentioned before, in order to obtain inclusive data and make sure to eliminate disguised bias, we need diverse teams working on the development and deployment of AI systems. We need to have different perspectives to be reflected in the data and the code, as well as different voices and different ideas, discovering the AI's potential to benefit humanity. So the real question is, how to include all the pieces in the puzzle in AI development? I believe the answer lies in making AI education, application, and research available for everyone. One organization that is doing this well and that I'm involved in is AI for All, a US-based nonprofit that aims to provide opportunities for underrepresented groups to get involved in AI. AI for All runs AI education and mentorship programs that provide high school students, especially females and minorities, from all around the world with a carefully prepared AI curriculum. This curriculum is approachable and inclusive and guides students to develop not only technical AI skills, but also an awareness of the AI ethics and the social implications of this important technology. AI for All programs expose students to innovative projects that have the potential to change the world for the better, as well as insightful mentors and role models who share their inspiring stories with students to encourage them. In this way, AI for All both informs and inspires young minds, supporting them to get involved, get included. In statistics, 1 year after completing an AI for All program, 88% of alumni feel that they can succeed in AI, and 100% of them feel AI can improve the world and their own communities. As an AI for All alumna, I can fondly say the Stanford AI for All camp I attended was a life-changing experience for me, and that it gave me the tools I needed to make an impact through AI. I had the opportunity to meet a supportive community of young people and learn from leading professors in the field of AI, which inspired me and provided me the knowledge to start working on my own project. I'm incredibly excited that AI for All has also recently made this impactful AI curriculum available for everyone through a free online program called AI for All Open Learning, which gives students and educators the tools to bring these AI learning opportunities into their own communities. This program is an excellent way for people that are interested in creating more diversity and inclusion AI to start doing so in their communities. As it is summed in their motto, AI will change the world. Who will change AI? AI for all makes education, application, and research accessible to all, increasing diversity by teaching us, people from all kinds of backgrounds, to change AI for the better and to use it as a tool to solve problems that we care about. AI for all included all the pieces, and so should we. We can learn from AI for all by inviting underrepresented young people into the field of AI, by giving them technical exposure, helping them create a community of their own, and showing them that AI can be used as a tool to solve problems. We should adopt these principles, these strategies, and implement them to our own communities, so that we can reach to many more people. We can ensure diversity and create a chain of inspiration and inclusivity, so that we can include all the pieces in our companies, countries, NGOs, and even schools. Inspired by my experience at the AI for All camp, I want to pass on my knowledge and awareness to the others in my community in Turkey. So I formed an organization, Technoladies, that promotes inclusion AI and helps mitigate the diversity crisis in Turkey. The main idea behind Technoladies is to create a supportive platform to encourage women from all ages to follow their passion in AI and technology in general, so that they won't go through the rough patches that many women in technology go through, including myself. We lent a helping hand to smart but excluded women, just like AI folded for me, through workshops, camps, weekly meetings, and Turkey's first all-girls hackathon that is in the planning stages. We have made many people realize that they have a choice, that they can pursue their interests in technology regardless of their gender, race, and ethnicity. And that is rewarding. Seeing this positive impact we can create by lending a helping hand for organizations like AI for All and Technoladies made me realize that we can all take action within our own measures, that there is no insufficient action, and even the smallest attempt at helping mitigate the lack of diversity counts for something. Industry, governments, NGOs, they can all work towards this by establishing programs with similar principles like AI for All and Technoladies that will make AI education, application, and research available for everyone, by supporting the organizations and initiatives that already exist, and by collaborating with them to prioritize inclusion in AI. Because we cannot create the bigger picture with missing pieces. In conclusion, the diversity crisis in AI is severe, and if left unchecked, will have numerous unwanted outcomes, such as bias in AI algorithms. If we do not take any actions immediately, the bias and the lack of diversity in the field of AI will pose a notable danger. No, I'm not talking about the Terminator. I mean the reinforcement of real-life discrimination and the inability to develop creative and durable solutions to problems that may go unseen by those who are already represented in the field of AI. The lack of diversity is a problem that will end up hurting everyone. Thus, we should all be taking action to ensure inclusion and diversity. We should all be implementing the principles of efforts like AI for All and Technoladies in our communities, as well as supporting them. Because as AI is called the new technology, the new electricity, the future of humankind, as it will affect all of us, we should all have a say in it, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, or other demographic variables. If we want to see this marvelous bigger picture at the end, all of the pieces should come together. We should embrace each other's different shapes and colors, different ideas and perspectives. Because to achieve something exceptional, we need to include all the pieces. Thank you. Yeah, of course. Oh.
Thank you for your talk. It was quite amazing to see the breadth of the things you consider. Did I understood correctly that you're 17 years old? Amazing. So I suppose that you have talked about all these issues with a lot of younger people. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what kind of attitudes do you witness and how to talk to them about it? I mean, are some dismissive? Do they care? Those who don't care, how to talk to them and so on?
Thank you so much. That is a great question. Usually in between me and my friends, the young people, it is in such a way that people are oppressed and they believe that they cannot be successful in fields like technology or AI, and that is embedded in their minds. Like they don't realize it that much. They don't say that, oh, I'm being suppressed by the society, but they all think in some subconscious level that they cannot get into these fields because the society thinks that technology isn't girly enough for them. And they can be sometimes dismissive about this, but as I mentioned in my speech, through organizations like Technoladies and AI for All, we try to lend a helping hand to these people who are actually interested but like can't show their interest in technology. And we do this by leaving our doors open, basically. In Technoladies, we conduct our sessions, weekly sessions, open to everyone. Like, you don't need any registration, you don't need to give any name or anything. You can just come and listen to what we have to say, listen to what AI is, how they can use AI to address issues that they care about, and I think that is a way to encourage them to explore their interests in this field. Thanks.
Thanks, Brandie. Thank you. I just wanted to briefly, I mean, it's as we've seen, this is probably the biggest issue when it comes to AI. What we see in the world is that a lot of AI is not driven by issues of dignity and of inclusion. It's currently driven by commercial interests or national arms races. That's the kind of reality of the AI world we live in. But that we're having these conversations is crucial because it comes down to dignity. The stakes are high, sometimes even life and death. It's very complicated. There are many stakeholders, there are many pieces to the puzzle, but it was really encouraging to kind of see the different ways that different groups are approaching this, either through principles or through projects. And that's it. This is a fight. We need to continue and make sure that AI kind of serves everybody today. Thank you.
So fantastic job. That was incredibly inspiring. And the breadth that was shown here was remarkable. I think you highlight one of the biggest problems for this track is there are so many important issues. Any one of you could have captured our attention for the entire day. And we have to unfortunately cover too many segments of importance in this one track. So, you know, it's almost as though this track alone warrants a whole forum. I welcome you all to come back at 2 p.m. after the lunch break, because there's another critically important subject, which is the role of AI in the digital information realm, which again is something that we all have to engage in much more deeply. And thank you for coming and your attention.